Okay, there we go.
Great. First off, again, thank you very much for taking the time. I guess the first question that I have is with the discrepancies and the inconsistencies that were witnessed in the recount process, and with this incredibly tight vote margin, just 6 votes out of some 400,000 cast, I guess why shouldn't the U.S. look into the outcome of the race, given the tight timeline and state law, for a judicial panel to review the results and make a decision?
Well, I think that, both campaigns and candidates and all candidates that run for office run under a set of laws. And in our case, we run under a set of Iowa laws and Iowa rules. We know the timeline, we know the process. We know that in this case, all legal votes were counted. They were counted on election night, and I was ahead at that time. They were recounted during the official county audit and the county canvass, and that was after all the provisional ballots had come in and the absentee ballots. And by state law, if a ballot is postmarked the day before the election, it has up until the Monday after the election in order to be counted. Those provisional ballots and absentee ballots were counted. There are no ballots that have not been counted. Legal ballots have all been counted through the audit process. I was ahead at the end of the official county canvass and the official audit, and then a recount was done. And the recount, if there are inconsistencies or irregularities, they were either accepted or persuaded or pushed by the Rita Hart campaign. So they ran the type of recount that they wanted to run. And despite that recount process, I'm still ahead, and then have now been certified as Congresswoman-elect and the winner of this election contest. So throughout that process, there are a set of rules. You can't change the rules after the election is over and because you didn't get the result that you wanted. Now, through this process, if it's determined that there are timelines that should either be extended or should be shortened, then that's a process that you can go through legislation. And Senator Hart was in the legislature, and she could have changed this process and introduced legislation at any point in time that she wanted to.
Okay, but we have heard from the Scott County auditor that there are 35 ballots that were legally cast by Iowans living overseas, including, I believe, active duty military, but because of a scanning error when they submitted their ballots, that they were not counted in that initial canvass of the vote. So I guess should those be reviewed and should those be looked at? And I guess given that, are you worried about, I guess, the credibility of your victory, knowing that there might be some votes out there that haven't been counted and may raise the question of, I guess, whether you did carry the majority?
Well, I think, again, given that I'm a 24-year military veteran, my husband is a 30-year military veteran. I have both active duty and reserve time. I certainly would want all ballots to be counted. And again, all legal ballots have been counted. They have been recounted, and the state has certified a winner. So I'm not sure exactly what Rita Hart is speculating on or what her allegations are. But throughout this process, there is a court process that could have made a decision on this. She elected not to follow the procedure that was available to her and to go through Iowa courts through an impartial judicial system that knows Iowa law. Instead of doing that, she wants to jump over the Iowa courts. She wants to jump over the will of the voters. She wants to jump over Iowa law and disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of voters until she gets the result that she wants. So she's taking this to a partisan political process, which doesn't adhere to Iowa law. It doesn't understand or know Iowa law, and she's taking it to a partisan political process rather than going through the courts. So I think this disenfranchises voters. It's not listening to the voters of Iowa, and it's trying to recount votes until you get what you want.
Okay. Well, what's your response to her argument that that the timeline, I guess, in state law somehow precludes having or mounting, I guess, an effective legal challenge? That we gave 72 members of recount boards roughly 2 weeks to do a recount, and argument from her is that even then they weren't able to do it sufficiently, and it's impractical to expect a 5-member judicial panel to do a review in less than a week.
Well, again, I trust the judicial system in Iowa to be impartial and to be able to make that determination if they thought the process, if there was enough time within that process, or if there were enough allegations that the process needed to be adapted or altered. So I would trust that process. In addition to which, the Hart campaign could have filed for a request for a recount on the day that the completion of the county canvass was taking place. So that would have given them additional time. They did not demand or request a hand recount in every county. So they delayed time. They delayed the recount process. And again, as a state legislature, if she thought that this process was not adequate, could have made and introduced legislation to change this process at any point in time. It's only now, after you've had an election, after you've had an official county canvass, after you've had a recount, that now we're saying the rules didn't give adequate time. This should have been introduced. You can't change the rules if you don't like the outcome and change them after an election process.
Mm-hmm. So kind of to that, we've heard from auditors and election commissioners, particularly in Scott, Clinton, and Johnson counties, that say that a change is needed in state law to the recount process. I guess, do you agree with that? And what changes, if any, do you think should be made to the law and to the process? I guess, what were the biggest problems or issues that you ran into, and how should those be addressed?
Well, I certainly think that they're on both sides of the aisle. Both parties think that when you have a close contested contest, what happens is that things get brought up that you didn't anticipate. And it's not unusual within Iowa code, or not only Iowa, but in all states in law, that law is reactive rather than proactive. So you don't always think of things until a problem arises, and then that starts legislation or a change in legislation. So I certainly think reviewing this process in a tight, close election, that there would be a reasonable course of action to look at the recount process. And I think that can be done in a bipartisan way, just as we made changes in election law this past session to ensure that there was a minimal amount of voter fraud. And that had been changes had been made several years ago when it came to voter ID. So I certainly think that there is room and appetite for that process to be changed. And it would not surprise me. Sometimes you don't see where changes need to be made until there's a close election such as this.
Okay. Are there any changes in particular that I guess you would be in favor of, or maybe that you would recommend?
I think the process needs to be transparent, and people need to know ahead of time what the rules are and then how to engage that process. So if there are, it's very descriptive in Iowa law, what ballots are, when ballots have to be in, when absentee ballot requests have to be in. We have a very regimented system, and we know that. So we know when an absentee ballot request can go out, when an absentee ballot request has to be into the auditor's office, when a ballot has to be back into the auditor's office. Campaigns, candidates are aware of those processes. So I think the more knowledge there is of those processes, and that, as I said, if there is change that's required, then those changes can be made in a legislative fashion. But to kind of try to circumvent Iowa law, go around Iowa law, go around the voters of Iowa, go around the intention and will of the voters, especially after promising to listen to Iowa voters and to be their voice. I think that then is a process that I think rightly concerns all of us, that you would skip over Iowa courts, disenfranchise voters, and go to a partisan political process.
I'm sorry, did you say one more question? Okay. Lastly, could you detail what preparations you've been making in the transition process in terms of hiring staff and setting up your congressional office and your district offices? Are you making hires? Have you made hires?
So we've taken this process very slowly, as you know, until we had the certification of election and I was declared the winner of this election contest. We were very slow to do any of those preparatory work. But now that I've been determined to be the Congresswoman-elect, we are looking at where to set up our district offices. I think our constituent services, constituent outreach is extraordinarily important. Following the lessons that I've learned from Representative Lobestack in constituent services, that's one of the things we want to make sure people know, that when Representative Lobestack leaves office, that their congressperson is available to them to answer their concerns, address any challenges or problems that they have, and that they know that I'm accessible and available. So I think the district component to me is more important than the Washington, D.C. component. Other than hiring a chief of staff and a scheduler communications type individual, we still have not gone through that process, but in all likelihood, we will have a district office in Davenport. But recall that we also have redistricting coming up. So we have to look at where we think the district is going to be midway through this year, because that also determines where we would have district offices. And then part of our orientation process, we had a Democrat legislator, I think from Maryland. There were so many, it's hard to recall all of them, but talking about mobile offices, that they had one district office and then they had mobile offices. So that in a large district such as ours is also an attractive possibility, given that, you know, from the two most furthest points, it's 5 hours now, and it's very possible that the district could expand more after the redistricting process. So looking at that, I think setting up our constituent services, being able to address people's concerns, being available and accessible is very important. And then we'll fill out the office in Washington, D.C. As this process and procedure continues to evolve.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you again very much for taking the time. I do appreciate it. And Eric, I would appreciate it if you could share the video with me. We would like to post it on our website and get it up there.
Well, thank you very much. You be safe and be well.
Yep, you too. Thank you.